The US Secretary of State began his visit to Tuscany at a monument to hundreds of Italian villagers murdered by the Nazis. It's a week since the US launched a missile strike on a Syrian airbase in response to an alleged Syrian chemical attack. Tillerson said the US wanted to show it will stand up for anyone who commits crimes against humanity.
We remember the events of August 12, 1944 that occurred in Santana, and we rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world.
Arriving in the walled city of Lucca, the foreign ministers of the world's largest economies. Climate change, migration and free trade are all on the agenda of this two-day summit, but the chemical attack in Syria and the US military response means there's now one main focus. The G7 is expected to demand that Russia ends its 6-year support for President Bashar Al Assad and instead uses its political leverage with the country to broker a peace settlement with the opposition. Rex Tillerson, the US Secretary of State, is expected to convey this message to the Russians later this week. The UK has also said the G7 should consider new sanctions against Russian individuals if Moscow fails to comply.
The message that we're sending to the Russians is very, very clear. Do they want to stick with a toxic regime? Do they want to be eternally associated with a guy who gasses his own people? Or do they want to work with the Americans and the rest of the G7?
But America's G7 allies know that a single US strike on Syria doesn't constitute a long-term strategy. Many of the foreign ministers gathered here are pushing the US for further details on what Washington's plans for Syria actually are. Is America now militarily engaged in the Syrian conflict? If so, what does this mean for the fight against ISIL? And what does increasing tensions with Moscow mean for the hope of a political solution to a war now entering its 7th year? Questions the Trump administration is now under growing pressure to answer. Neve Barker, Al Jazeera, Lucca.